Hi there. Good morning. For some of you, I may be a stranger, but for many of you, I'm Chris, and here I am living on Salt Spring Island. I'm sorry to be communicating with you by video. I'd rather have it live, but this particular weekend, I got invited to go to my son and daughter in law's house with Ellen to see our granddaughter. And since COVID has separated us for the last year, these opportunities are not to be missed. So we're going to see her, and alas, Ellen and I will send our good wishes to you virtually and hope that in the near future we'll be able to meet face to face. I wanted to talk to you today about um, what has happened in our life over the last year. But first, let me say thank you for all of the connections that we've had with College Street United. Delicious meals from Frank. Thank you over the early winter and late winter. Those were great to send to friends around Toronto. And Silka, you've done a great job in communicating, helping us to zoom in when we can, and so we are very thankful for that. As some of you may have heard that I have retired but continued my profession as a baker. And so on any Saturday, we have a bake stand down at the foot of our driveway, just off here to my right a little bit. And we fill it with baguettes and croissants, pain au chocolat, and other things like pies and jams. It began as a COVID kind of experiment, and I started baking at 4 in the morning. And as our repertoire of items grew, I got up earlier and earlier. So now I get up I have a little nap on Friday evening, and then I get up at 11 o'clock and I bake right through the night. Why am I telling you this? Well, apart from getting some sympathy, if you're up in the middle of the night on Saturday morning very early, you might send good vibes my direction, because I can always use the spirit and the lift. The yeast rises and my energy keeps up. I'm also telling you this because I listen to CBC Radio throughout the night, and they have a wonderful selection of programs, one of which comes from the BBC. It's about 2:20 a.m., at least here in British Columbia. And there's a commentator named Andrew Swan who does this marvelous critique of our world by saying, "What do we know now that we didn't know then?" which is the title of this sermon. Now, he uses a 7-day window, and he asks his audience, what do we now know that we did not know 7 days ago? And he uses that as a way to poke fun at American exceptionalism and European snobbery, and it's brilliant. It's funny and it's poignant. I wanted to stretch the parameters a bit and ask this morning, what do we know now that we did not know a year ago? When the pandemic was fresh, everything was uncertain. What have we learned in that space of time? And as a text to help us reflect on that, I chose the famous one from Luke chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan. And we'll just do a quick summary of that. You recall that there's a man who comes to Jesus who is called a lawyer in the Bible, but that means as someone who is read in the law, that is to say the Torah in the Hebraic world, an expert. And he is asking about eternal life. We shouldn't hear that as, and what about the endlessness of days that I might enjoy after my death? He's really talking about, how do I commune with my Creator? How do I become one with the eternal? How do I somehow let that world into mine so that they are more or less continuous? Jesus asks him, well, what does the law say? And the lawyer, quite deftly, quotes the two most famous passages, one from Deuteronomy and one from Leviticus. You should love your God with all your heart and mind and soul and strength. A famous passage. It's recited every Friday night at Sabbath services in Jewish synagogues around the world. And then he quotes from Leviticus, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. And again, that has become so common to us that we use it all the time. Jesus says, well, that's the law, go do it. Now, the lawyer didn't want to be put off, and so he said, well, but who is my neighbor? And that became the question not only of the story, but the question of the ages, to which Jesus responds with that famous story of the Good Samaritan. Don't need to go into the details of the story except to say that to put good and Samaritan in the same phrase in first century Galilee is a contradiction in terms. Samaritans were known to be bad people. They were the heretics. They were the ones who should have known better, but didn't. They're the ones you're allowed to hate. In fact, in the time of Jesus, it was assumed that if you walked even through the shadow of a Samaritan, you would be contaminated. So to call a Samaritan good, or to portray a Samaritan as one who is more just than a Levite or a priest, was quite a contradiction and a stretching of the boundaries of neighborhood, of who is my neighbor. And that's the predicament that I see us facing at this time of the pandemic. So with that kind of a prologue, let's just bow our heads and offer a word of prayer. God, help us never to use our reason against the truth. Amen. Okay, so what have we learned in the last year and a half? Well, we've learned that we can binge watch pretty well anything, and that there are some programs that are going the rounds. Hands up, those of you who have seen Bridgerton and watched it one program after another. And I understand Sweet Tooth is the latest version of binge watching. We have learned that you can buy almost anything online and that Amazon will deliver it to your door, from soup to nuts. And I'm a perfect example. This past week, I had a box of diatastic, I can never say that word, malting yeast came to me for the bakery, and next week I get a brad nailer. Talk about different things, all showing up here without any effort. That we have learned. We've learned that you can Zoom almost anything, from opera programs to comic books. We even pray Zoom, which seems like a bit of a contradiction, but it works, and we just did it a few seconds ago. We have learned that the Prime Minister's apparel, his hair design, lack of facial hair or abundance of hair, is more telling than what he actually says in his press conferences with regard to the state of the pandemic and the political life of our country. On a serious note, we have learned that love can be expressed virtually, that we can smile and kid and read stories and say over and over how much we miss someone and how much we love them. But we have learned that nothing can substitute for a face-to-face encounter, which is why Ellen and I are going away this weekend, for instance. We have learned that love of neighbor is reciprocal. Do you remember when we had the Mass? I brought my mask here. Do you remember when the debate around masks was taking place? And initially, health authorities said, well, yeah, you're going to get it all messed up, and it doesn't really protect you here and here. So it might give you a false sense of security, and indeed you might be using it in such a way that it's counterproductive because you touch your mask, you touch your mouth, and so the word on masks was, well, maybe not. And then as we grew into the pandemic, we learned, oh, no. I'm not wearing my mask because I think it's going to protect me. I'm wearing my mask because it'll protect you. And you wear your mask to protect me. This is something Christians have known for a long time, but love is about solidarity. It's about reciprocal affection. I love not because I'm going to get something back. I put the mask on not because I think it's going to do anything for me. I put the mask on so that it does something for you. This is a lesson in social solidarity that became widespread over the last year and now is taken for granted, and a key message within the Christian tradition itself, that love doesn't mean just something that I get. Love is something that is reciprocal, that spreads out and reaches others. We've also learned, and this has been repeated by politicians around the province and around the country, that some things we thought were impossible, were simply a fact of life, aren't. Poverty, for instance, homelessness. When the pandemic hit, we knew we had to address those without houses, those who needed shelter. And we put the money and the political will behind giving everyone, certainly in New Brunswick, or in British Columbia, giving those who were without house a shelter. And while it cost a lot and took a tremendous amount of political will, it was possible. So, as I have said often, poverty is not an economic necessity. It's a political choice. And the pandemic taught us that there are times when we can make a different choice than we have in the past. We can choose that people will not be vulnerable and will not be victims of economic exploitation and the distress of houselessness and vulnerability. That's a great learning if we can carry that forward into the next few years. Finally, we learned in the pandemic, for all of its dire consequences, and they have been devastating, we have learned that the virus does not make distinctions about race or religion or political ideology or social standing. To the virus, we are all human beings. All of us are neighbors. There's no point in making distinctions we think are important or valid. The virus does not care, and we see this even more so with the Delta variant that's sweeping across the United States. We are all in this together. And what we have learned and politicians are saying to us is none are safe until all are protected. We have a vested interest in widening our arms as far as we can to include all the neighbors that are within reach, so that all are safe. And once all are safe, then we will have security. This is a very tough lesson. This last week I was having a conversation as part of the executive of the United Church Union, and we were discussing the word all. And while it's quick off the tongue and easy to say, all is a very tough concept when it comes to neighborliness. You mean that Samaritan is part of my neighborhood? That those people we don't like are part of the all that must be protected? That's what the pandemic is teaching us. All is a tough word. It's not simple. It's filled with contradictions and ambiguities, and it's something we have to strive for if we all want to be safe. So that's what we learned. Now, as Christians, we bring to the debate some wisdom with regard to neighborliness and trying to stretch our love that wide that it includes all. And we can say that it's taken 2,000 years to discover it ain't easy, and that we often make mistakes. And the distress over the residential schools in the country has shown us that we have been horrendous in our treatment of those who are vulnerable. But we continue to struggle as Christians and believers to create the allness of our neighborhood. And we do that because we have learned, and I've said this often, that we live by forgiveness. We are none of us perfect. We all make mistakes. But we are not defined by those errors. We are defined by our willingness to continue to forgive ourselves and forgive others in the striving to create all as neighbors. That's our work. I can hear that Ellen is coming home. She's just driving in, so she's going to join me in a second. But let me just say, if you come out to Salt Spring Island ever and you're looking for a fresh croissant and a hot coffee, it's here to share with you. Thank you so much for joining me.